Yeah, well, let's talk about it. What happened with MS is they started with these, there was a war in El Salvador, and also in Guatemala, and of course Honduras was involved. They started like refugees, like the Mexican refugees during the Mexican Revolution. They came to LA mostly. Now they were coming from war. They didn't have gangs like this. Even in the worst period of the war, they didn't have gangs like this. They had maras, they had little groupings of guys, they had their bandas, which were like organized crime guys, but nothing like this. They come to LA. Where do they meet? These heavily tattooed Chicanos who've been doing this for, at least at the time, 80 years.
So there was already heavily tattooed.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's another question.
They did not. They did not bring anything from El Salvador to create MS other than certain things. Their wording, some of their slang, and their trauma that they brought. What spoke to them was the Chicano gangster cholo.
Where does that happen?
This is what happened. Mara Salvatrucha started as Mara stoners. They were all like weed, and they were all into heavy metal. Because this is the culture that was hidden.
Alex says that.
Yeah, they were all into
Metallica,
Ozzy Osbourne. They had AC/DC T-shirts, and they had long hair, and they were all stoked. Well, guess what? They go into the juvenile halls. This is lightweight, man. The Chicanos are like, hey, man, you guys better catch up, or you're gonna get stomped on, you know. So they started coming out of the juvenile halls and as cholos. And this got a big rift between them, because I know some guys who were modest stoners, old guys who said, we never liked the cholos, you know, but it didn't matter. Pretty soon, every one of those guys became cholos, and then Mara Salvatrucha became the way they wanted to call themselves.
What year? 85, 90s?
This is mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s.
And it started in one corner, leeward, in a 7-Eleven. They used to hang out, guys were hanging out, and then all of a sudden they became Mara Salvatrucha. They were still MS, now they wanted to be known as Mara Salvatrucha. Now their big enemy was 18th Street, because actually they used to be part of 18th Street.
That's what I heard.
Now what happened though is that they decided to be Salvadorians, cholos but Salvadorians. So then the 18th Street battled them, like, you know, knocking them back down. They got very strong in that time though. They got strong. I will have to say that they're what they proved themselves is that they could be as strong and as powerful as any Chicano gang. But here's one thing, they are not the worst gang in LA, and they are not the most powerful, and they are not the worst, not in LA. They're just one of 700 gangs, you know.
700, I thought it was 500.
Yeah, 700, no, there's more. Anyway, the point is, they're not any better or worse. Now the police, they keep telling people these guys are worse. They're all armed National Guards people. It's a bunch of lies. These were kids that grew up in LA, refugee, many babies when their parents were brought them up, who got acculturated in the Chicano culture, and then they became who they were. But people were building them up. But among the gang structure, they weren't any worse or any better. They just happened to prove that they could handle themselves. This is fine. Any gang does that.
Needs to.
And eventually, as you know, they got pulled into the Sucres structure. They got pulled in. They're part of it, you know. So from an LA viewpoint, those guys aren't they're not any different. But from the way the media looks at it, and the way from the national, federal indictments, they've isolated that one particular gang, made them something, mythologized them in the midst of the reality, and made them more something that's more than what they are. And I think partly they demonize them. They demonize them from the viewpoint, here's an exotic group of Salvadorans we can demonize. But you know, if they looked at the whole gang structure, they realize that they're part of something bigger that they can't make connections with. My way of looking at it is the Salvadorian trauma of war, just like the Honduran and the Guatemalan. That trauma met the trauma of the LA gang life, which was very intense, different than any other city. Only Chicago comes close. And here's the reason why. Chicago and LA are the two manufacturing centers in the country. LA is actually the largest, but Chicago is more industrial. We are totally products of an industrial age. And when the industry started dying during the 80s, this is where everything got so bad.
Crack cocaine,
yeah.
How are you going to make money?
Yeah.
I mean,
so we're a part of all that. They can't isolate the MS from that. And the MS is a part of that whole thing that happened. Latin Kings developed into a super gang during that period. Sucres became a super gang during that period. Bloods and Crips became super gangs during that period. The Gangster Disciples out of Chicago, and so did MS. They were all part of 18th Street too. They were all part of this process of deindustrialization, no jobs, nowhere to go. Drugs became central to the whole economy, and this is what you created. So MS, as I look at it, is just part of that. When I went and studied them in '93,
You went to El Salvador?
Yeah, I went to El Salvador. I saw them as homeboys. I saw them as cholos like me. I saw them as part of La Vida Loca. I didn't see them as something different or nada. They were like just like me. The one thing they would do is their tattoo their faces. Chicanos had done that.
That's what I want to
Yeah.
know, is I love to
But-
go back to, you said that they
Yeah.
saw people who had
Yeah,
tattoos.
yeah.
Can you tell me, or
But the
go back?
difference was in El Salvador, and this is what I noticed, is a lot of the kids, if you had a tattooed face in LA, you were Chicano. It wasn't like every kid had it, but you had, usually they were the kids that had no families. Nobody gave a hoot. I had tattoos, but my mom was like screaming and yelling. I wouldn't put a tattoo on my face. You know what I'm saying? I knew homeboys that had them, but they were like the guys who just had nothing. They couldn't care. My mom stopped me from having tattoos on my face. Okay, well, you're going to El Salvador. You got a lot of homeless kids from the war, from poverty. They're hungry. They see these LA gang guys who weren't tattooed face that much. Maybe a little bit here, a little bit. They brought some of it with them. These guys completely ate it up. But they have no families. They have nothing. They have no churches. They have nothing to hold them back. So they just went all the way with it. But it started with the Chicanos, and they just kind of took it to another level. I look at it. Of course, if you go to some of the prisons now, you see guys with tattooed faces like these guys. But really,
Here in America?
yeah. If
Also?
you go to some of the prisons, you'll see it. But it's not as prevalent as when you go down there.
Right.
In Central America, it's a real prevalent thing. Because you're talking about homeless, abandoned kids that are now bought into this culture.
It's the shock and awe